The first blow of the hammer rang out across the church square like a gunshot, and the people gathered in Sunday clothes pressed closer as Sheriff Whitlock raised the plank high and nailed it to the porch beam, each strike echoing off the whitewashed walls. The word "unclean" blazed in thick black paint, letters jagged and dripping as though carved in anger itself. And the crowd gasped, some with hands over their mouths, others with smirks curling like smoke. Selena flinched when the sheriff shoved her beneath the sign, her back scraping splinters, her eyes lowered but not broken. Her dress plain and wrinkled from nights spent sleeping in corners where no one offered shelter. Mothers clutched children tighter, whispering warnings that she was cursed, that to brush her sleeve was to invite fever, and fathers spat in the dust, muttering that the town was safer with her branded than free. "They say she carries sickness," one woman hissed. "No, it's worse. They say she consorted with an outlaw." "Her mother died raving, didn't she?" another replied, crossing herself as though to ward off spirits. The sheriff's voice boomed, thick with satisfaction, as he spread his arms. "This woman will not sit in our pews, will not eat at our tables, will not share the same air as decent folk. This board is her mark, and she will wear it as long as she breathes." Laughter erupted from the edge of the crowd, where men leaned from the saloon doorway, mugs in hand, their voices cruel with drink. "Let's see how long she stands before she crawls," one jeered, and another spat. "Bet she won't last an hour." Selena's hands trembled, nails biting into her palms, but she gripped her fingers together until her knuckles whitened, forcing herself to stay upright, though heat climbed her cheeks and humiliation burned hotter than the noon sun. From inside the church came the sound of hymns, brides singing with veils shining under lantern glow, their voices drifting through the door to sting Selena's ears with reminders of what she was denied. Children pointed and tugged at skirts, demanding explanations, and one boy no older than 10 asked, "Papa, what does it mean?" The man bent low, his voice hard as iron, and growled, "It means she is less than us." Those words struck deeper than the hammer, deeper than the sheriff's shove, and Selena's breath caught, but she raised her head enough that the letters of the board cast a shadow across her brow. Some in the crowd laughed, delighted at her shame. Some shook their heads with pity they dared not show too loudly, while others stared in silence, curious to see if she would fall. The sheriff crossed his arms and stood back, proud of the work as though justice itself had been nailed into wood, and he sneered down at her. "Stand there, girl. Let the town see what you are." The hammer slipped from his hand to his belt, but its echo seemed to still beat inside her skull, every strike a curse branded into her flesh, though no mark touched her skin. Selena bit her lip until blood rose, her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to bow though her knees wavered. A hush spread as the last bell faded, the square crowded tight, every gaze heavy with judgment. Then a voice broke the silence, sharp and eager from the back. "She won't last the night." The crowd shifted, hungry for spectacle, and as Selena stood trembling beneath the word that condemned her, the people leaned closer, waiting for the moment her strength would finally shatter. The sheriff's boots struck the porch as he stepped back, folding his arms like a man proud of a gallows he'd built, and the crowd surged forward now that the board was hung and the shame declared. The square smelled of sweat, dust, and kerosene from the lanterns burning at the edges, and into that hot air poured the sound of laughter, sharp and merciless. A boy darted close enough to throw a pebble at Selena's feet, and when it bounced against her worn shoe, the crowd roared, delighted at such courage from one too small to be punished. "Go on, ghost girl," someone shouted. "Fall down so we can all go home." Another voice answered, "Nay, let her stand. Watch her wither like a weed in the sun." The insults flew thicker than dust, each word meant to grind her down until her knees buckled. Yet Selena gripped her hands together tighter and fixed her gaze not on the crowd, but on the crooked cross nailed above the church door, as though daring heaven itself to answer. Her lips moved without sound. Prayer or curse no one could tell, and that unsettled some who whispered that madness had already taken her. A man leaned against the post, spit dark into the dirt, and sneered. "She shared a roof with fever once, and now she shares it with the devil." His wife tugged at his arm nervously, muttering about tempting fate, but his laugh was hard and ugly. A woman clutching a baby pressed closer, rocking her child as though shielding it from invisible rot, and she hissed, "Don't breathe near us." Selena flinched at that, shame rising hot in her chest. Yet still she stood. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the square, but still the crowd did not thin, for cruelty is a fire that draws folk the way hymns never can. Young men tossed coins in the dust at her feet, pretending to bid on how many hours she would last, and each clang of silver mocked her poverty. One coin rolled to her boot, and she froze. Tempted for a heartbeat to stoop and snatch it, but pride burned stronger than hunger, and she pressed her shoulders back, refusing to give them the sight of her bending. Gasps rose at her defiance, followed swiftly by more jeers. "Hear her pride! Pride is uncleaner than sickness!" The sheriff barked agreement, raising his voice so all could hear. "Mark her well, folk. This is what happens to those who will not bow." His words sparked laughter, but beneath it a murmur stirred, faint and uneasy, for not all hearts were cruel, and some found themselves wondering how long a girl could endure while every tongue cut her raw. Still Selena's knees shook, still her hands trembled at her sides, but still she would not fall, though every breath scraped her throat dry. The church bell tolled once more, summoning the blessed to evening hymn, and its solemn notes carried out into the square. The brides from the morning, veils still pinned, passed by on their husbands' arms, eyes sliding over Selena without pity, though one bride dared glance too long and flushed red before looking away. A drunk staggered from the saloon, mug spilling, and shouted, "Why leave her standing? Strip the shawl from her shoulders and see if pride still holds her up." The crowd hooted, some cheering him on, some turning away uneasily, and Selena's heart thudded so hard she thought her ribs might crack. She clutched the board's post behind her back, steadying herself, refusing to yield. But the drunk lurched closer, face twisted, hand stretching toward her arm, and the people leaned forward, greedy for spectacle, as the first man dared to test whether her defiance could withstand a touch. The drunk's hand closed around Selena's arm, his fingers digging into her sleeve with a grip stronger than his stagger suggested, and the crowd erupted with a roar that was half laughter and half disbelief that anyone dared break the sheriff's decree. Selena gasped, twisting to pull free, but his breath reeked of whiskey and rot, and his face hovered so close she could see the broken veins in his cheeks. "Let's see if the unclean bleeds like the rest of us," he slurred, jerking her forward, and the people pressed closer, eager for the sight of her dignity torn away. Children squealed, men cheered. Women covered their mouths but did not look away, for shame and spectacle were married in their eyes. Selena's heart hammered, terror crawling her spine, yet beneath it flickered something stubborn, something that refused to let him drag her into the dust. She yanked hard, but his grip only tightened, bruising her thin flesh, and he barked a laugh, raising his mug to the crowd. "Look here, she's softer than she looks, perhaps not so cursed after all." His words cut sharper than his grip, for the crowd howled approval, their cruelty swelling like floodwaters, and Selena thought she might drown in the noise. The sheriff made no move to stop it. His arms folded, his smirk wide, For her humiliation served his purpose better than silence. Desperation clawed at her, but she clutched the board's post with her free hand, pressing her back against it until the splinters bit her skin, anchoring herself with pain, refusing to let the word above her crush her into the ground. "Unhand me," she choked. Her voice cracked but steady enough to cut through the jeers, and a ripple of surprise flickered in the crowd, for they had not expected her to speak. The drunk's grin widened. "Or what? You'll curse me? Spit your sickness in my face?" He leaned closer, daring her, mocking her, and the crowd laughed louder. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, biting her lip until blood welled copper on her tongue, and with the taste came a surge of fury. She shoved his chest with all the strength left in her, and though it barely rocked him, it startled him enough that ale sloshed over his shirt. Gasps rose, quickly smothered by fresh laughter, yet the tone had changed. No longer pure delight, but a thread of unease, for her defiance was not breaking but growing. "She dares strike!" someone shouted, and another cried, "Pride is uncleaner than filth!" The sheriff seized the moment, his voice booming over the noise. "See how rebellion clings to the cursed? She is proof of her own guilt." The drunk raised his hand as if to slap her down, and Selena braced, her stomach knotted, her breath caught, her hands trembling but clenched into fists. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for the fall, whispering that the moment had come at last, that the cursed girl would be broken before their eyes. But just as his palm swung through the air, another hand shot out from the fringe of the crowd, catching his wrist mid-strike, halting it cold. The drunk's eyes bulged, the crowd fell silent, and for the first time that night, every gaze shifted away from Selena and fixed on the stranger whose grip turned the blow aside with effortless strength. The drunk twisted, cursing, but his wrist remained locked in the iron grip of the man who had stepped from the fringe, a shadow until now, his figure tall and broad, his clothes rough from trail dust, his beard unshaven, his eyes glinting with the calm of someone who had faced storms fiercer than men's laughter. The crowd gasped, recognition rippling in murmurs. "A mountain man. He's not from here." The sheriff's smirk faltered for the first time, for he knew the breed. Loners who lived beyond the town's laws, hardened by wilderness, answerable to no man. The stranger's voice came low, even, as he released the drunk's wrist with a shove that sent him stumbling back into the dirt. "No man strikes a woman while I draw breath." The words cut through the night, sharper than any whip, and silence followed, broken only by the crack of the drunk's mug shattering as it hit the ground. Selena, breathless, pressed her back against the porch post, her heart thundering, unable to believe anyone had spoken on her behalf. But the stranger did not look at her yet. His eyes swept the crowd, steady and unflinching, until men shifted uneasily under his gaze. The sheriff stepped forward, bristling, puffing his chest. "This is town business," he barked, "and you do well to walk back into the hills you came from." But the mountain man, some whispered his name as Asa Blackthorn, though most had never seen him this close, did not move, did not lower his eyes. "You've marked her with your board," he said, nodding toward the crooked plank that loomed above Selena. "But no mark gives you leave to beat her like an animal." His calmness was more threatening than a shout, and the crowd shifted again, whispers racing, some angered by his defiance, some quietly relieved that someone had dared speak. Selena's hands trembled against the wood, torn between gratitude and fear, for she knew what defiance brought in this town. Sharper punishment, deeper shame. Yet she could not tear her eyes from him, this stranger who carried the scent of pine and fire smoke, who stood between her and the drunk as though it were the most natural act in the world. The sheriff's jaw clenched, his authority challenged before the whole square, and he raised his voice louder. If she stands alone. That is the law. The mountain man finally turned his head, and his gaze met Selena's for the first time. It was not pity she saw there, nor scorn, but recognition, a simple acknowledgement that she still stood, though every stone had been cast. Her breath caught, her throat thick, and for a heartbeat the noise of the crowd fell away. Then the sheriff slammed his boot against the porch step and growled, "Enough! At dawn she will be dragged away, and if you remain, you'll join her." The people stirred, some nodding, some shrinking back, hungry to see the punishment, yet uneasy under the mountain man's steady calm. Selena gripped the post tighter, her body weak but her spirit burning anew, as if his gaze had given her strength she no longer had on her own. The sheriff jabbed a finger at Asa, voice shaking with rage. "Leave this town before the sun rises, or you'll learn what it means to defy my word." But the mountain man did not move, only stepped closer to the porch, planting his boots in the dust as if he had taken root. And with his silence he promised what the sheriff most feared, that he would still be standing when dawn came. Dawn was still hours away, but Sheriff Whitlock's threat hung heavier than the board above Selena's head, and the square buzzed with restless murmurs as the crowd weighed the danger of the mountain man's defiance against their hunger for her humiliation. Asa Blackthorn stood silent at the base of the porch, arms folded, his broad shoulders shadowing Selena as if by instinct, his calm more dangerous than any shout, while the sheriff prowled like a wolf denied his kill. "You think your silence will save her?" Whitlock snarled, his voice cutting the hush. "Then both of you will wear the mark." At his gesture, two deputies shouldered through the throng, carrying a second plank hastily scrawled with the same word, "Unclean," the paint still wet, dripping black streaks down the grain. Gasps rippled, for never before had a man been branded in such a way, and the cruelty of it sparked a flicker of unease even in those who had come only to laugh. The deputies raised the board high, their hammers ready, and the sheriff barked, "Nail it to his back! Let this stranger feel what it is to stand with the damned!" The crowd erupted, half in cheers, half in shock, the noise rising like a storm. Selena's stomach turned, horror pressing the breath from her chest. She clutched the porch post, whispering hoarsely, "No, leave him! This is my burden!" But her voice was swallowed in the chaos. Asa lifted his head slowly, his dark eyes steady, and he spoke at last, his voice deep and even, carrying above the din without strain. "I have carried heavier names than yours, Sheriff, but no man here will lay that board upon me." His words struck like iron, silencing the noise for a heartbeat before the sheriff's rage flared hotter. "Then you'll be whipped in her place," Whitlock bellowed, and his deputies shifted uncertainly, for the law they served had never been twisted so openly. The preacher at the church door turned away, unwilling to witness, but his cowardice only deepened the shame that weighed upon the square. Selena's vision blurred with tears she had sworn not to shed, her heart pounding with dread, for this man who owed her nothing had stepped into her storm, and now stood to be broken by it. The sheriff raised his hand, signaling the deputies forward, but before they could move, Asa strode to the porch step, each bootfall slow, deliberate, like thunder rolling down a mountain. He stopped at Selena's side, close enough that she felt the warmth of him even through her trembling. And he reached up, not to tear the board down, not yet, but to press his hand against the post, steadying it, steadying her, as though to say he would not be moved. The deputies faltered, glancing at each other, unwilling to be the first to test him. But the sheriff's eyes burned with fury, and he shouted louder, "At sunrise the lash will fall, and all will see what comes of siding with filth." The crowd hissed, some thrilled, some unsettled, and whispers swirled. Would the mountain man yield? Would the girl finally collapse? Selena's lips parted, her breath shaking, for she had thought herself alone in her shame. Yet now her strength was twined with his, and the board above them no longer felt as heavy. But as the sheriff turned away, satisfied with his decree, a voice rose sharp from the throng, cutting the air like a knife. "Why punish him when the girl's already broken? Drag her out now and be done with it." The shout ignited the crowd like a spark to dry grass, and suddenly men surged forward, voices clashing, some demanding she be dragged into the street at once, others muttering that the sheriff had already spoken and dawn would decide. The press of bodies closed in around the porch, hot and stinking of sweat and whiskey, the word unclean looming above Selena like a brand burned into her skin. Her chest heaved, her legs shook, and for a moment she felt herself slipping, the ground tilting as though the weight of their hate might crush her flat. Hands brushed her sleeves, rough fingers tugged at her skirt, and a woman's voice screeched, "Don't let her touch you! She'll carry her filth to your children!" Panic rose, sharp and suffocating, and Selena clawed at the porch post, clutching the splintered wood until her palms bled. Asa Blackthorne stepped forward, his shadow blotting out the torchlight, and his voice thundered low but clear, "Back away." The men nearest him stumbled as though shoved by more than words, but the sheriff barked, "Seize her! Let the town see justice!" Two braver souls lunged, grasping at Selena's arms, and she cried out, her voice raw and piercing, but Asa was there in a blink, his hand clamping one man's wrist, twisting until bone popped, and the man yelped in pain. Gasps ripped through the square, and for a heartbeat, silence fell, broken only by the drunkard's laughter from the saloon, ugly and shrill. "See, he'll fight the whole town for her. Must be she's not so unclean after all." The taunt turned some laughter to snarls, for nothing stung pride sharper than the hint of truth. Selena's heart pounded as Asa shoved the second man back into the crowd, his shoulders broad, his stance unyielding, yet she could see the fury mounting in Whitlock's eyes. The sheriff raised his hand high and shouted, "At dawn, both of them, dragged through the square, whipped until no man doubts the law." The promise hung heavy, but the crowd still seethed, restless, unwilling to wait for morning. A stone flew, striking the church wall inches from Selena's face, dust spraying her eyes. She blinked, choking back tears, her arms trembling, yet still she clung to the post, refusing to fall. "Look at her!" someone jeered. "She'll cling till her nails tear off!" Another shouted. "She should be buried with her sign!" Selena's vision swam, her knees sagged, and for the first time she felt her grip slipping. Asa glanced at her, his jaw set, and though he did not touch her, his voice carried steady and low. Meant only for her. "Stand. Not for them, for yourself." His words struck through the chaos like a lifeline, and she drew a ragged breath, straightened her spine though her body screamed in protest. The crowd growled, frustrated that she had not broken, their hunger for spectacle gnawing at patience. The sheriff, red-faced, stomped onto the porch and tore the hat from his head, flinging it into the dust. "Enough!" he bellowed. "If she will not fall, we will make her crawl. At the last bell she will be cast into the street." The people roared approval, stamping their boots, pounding fists against posts, their rage swelling into chant, "Crawl her out! Crawl her out!" Selena swayed, her lips parted, her breath coming shallow as the noise thundered in her skull, and as the mob surged forward again, the post at her back shuddering under their fists. She felt the wood crack and knew she had only moments before they tore her from it. The porch beam groaned under the fists pounding against it, the word unclean shaking above Selena's head as though even the wood wished to fall away from her, and the crowd howled louder, the chant rolling like thunder. Crawl her out! Crawl her out! Rough hands seized her arm, yanking so hard her shoulder burned, and she cried out, her voice swallowed by the frenzy. The post splintered, sharp edges biting her palms, as she clung with every shred of strength left in her. Asa Blackthorne surged forward, his voice booming over the roar. Enough! He shoved one man back so hard he toppled into the dust, then planted himself squarely before Selena, his broad frame a wall the mob could not slip past. For a heartbeat the chant faltered, broken by gasps and curses, but Sheriff Whitlock's bark whipped them on again. She will not stand above us! Tear her down! His deputies moved in, fists clenched, eager to prove their loyalty, and Asa met them head-on, his fist crashing into the first jaw, his shoulder slamming the second back into the crowd. The people shrieked with shock, some surging closer, others stumbling away, for the mountain man fought not with drunken rage but with a calm fury, each strike precise, each movement steady. Selena sagged against the beam, her breath ragged, her knees buckling, yet still her hands clung through blood streaked her fingers. She's breaking, someone shouted, and fresh laughter rolled, cruel and triumphant. Asa turned, catching her eyes for the first time since the fight began, and she saw no fear there, only steadiness, as if his strength were offered freely for her to lean upon. Stand, Selena, he told her, his voice low but carrying. Their hate cannot outlast you. His words lit a spark in her chest, fragile but bright, and she dragged air into her lungs, forcing her spine straight through the weight of the board loomed above. The sheriff snarled, his face purple with rage, and drew his revolver, firing a shot into the air to freeze the chaos. The crack silenced the mob in an instant, the smoke curling above the porch, and Whitlock raised the pistol toward Asa. You defy my law in my town, he growled. Then you'll die by it. Gasps rippled, fear prickling through the people, for this was no longer spectacle but blood about to spill. Selena's heart lurched, her body trembling with terror, yet she stepped from the post despite her weakness, clutching Asa's arm, her voice hoarse but sharp. Don't. The crowd gasped, for they had not expected her to move toward the man they despised, nor to speak in his defense. The sheriff sneered, cocking the hammer, his finger tightening. You'd shield him? Then you'll fall together. The square held its breath. Children clutched close, men tense with dread, as the pistol gleamed in the dawn's first gray light, and Selena, swaying yet unbroken, whispered the words that turned the square colder than the gun itself. Better to fall beside him than crawl alone beneath you. The hammer of the pistol clicked back, the sound sharp as a rattlesnake's warning, and the crowd froze as though the whole town had been struck blind and deaf in that instant. Every gaze locked on the sheriff's hand, and the woman swaying beneath the board. Selena clutched Asa's arm, her body trembling but her chin lifted, her words still hanging in the air. Better to fall beside him than crawl alone beneath you. And the defiance of it stung Whitlock's pride deeper than any wound. His finger tightened, smoke burst, and the shot cracked through the square, the recoil echoing off the church walls. Selena flinched, a scream caught in her throat. But the bullet buried itself not in flesh but in the porch beam inches above her head, splintering wood so that chips rained into her hair. Gasps tore from the crowd, mothers shrieked, children wailed, and for a heartbeat it seemed the sheriff had missed. But the truth lay colder. He had meant it as a warning, a promise that the next shot would not stray. Asa stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Selena and the gun, his voice low, steady, carrying so that none could mistake his words. If you fire again, Sheriff, you will not break her. You will break this town. The calmness rattled them more than the gun, and murmurs spread. Some men nodding grimly, others whispering that Whitlock had gone too far. The preacher at last stepped forward, pale and shaking, his voice thin but audible. Sheriff, "This is the Lord's house. You cannot spill blood on its porch." Whitlock swung his pistol toward him, silencing the plea with a glare that turned the man white as chalk. "The Lord leaves this town to me," he snarled, "and I will not have my law mocked by a filthy girl and a vagrant." He jerked the barrel back toward Asa, but before his finger could close again, a woman's voice rose sharp from the throng. "She is not unclean. You know it. Whitlock!" The words struck the square like a second shot, and the people turned, searching for the speaker. It was old Mrs. Tanner, wrinkled and bent, clutching a shawl about her shoulders, her eyes blazing with fury. She stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger at the sheriff. "You branded her because she refused you, because she would not be your bride." Gasps erupted, shouts of disbelief, the crowd boiling with shock. Selena staggered, the truth slamming into her like a blow, and the sheriff's face darkened with rage. "Lies!" he thundered, but his voice cracked, and in that crack the crowd heard guilt. Asa's eyes narrowed, his jaw set. For now the storm had shifted. No longer only Selena's shame, but the sheriff's corruption exposed. The mob swelled, murmurs turning sharp, dividing between those clinging to fear of the law and those stirred by the revelation. Selena's knees buckled, her hands clutched Asa's sleeve, but her eyes lifted, burning with new fire, for her humiliation had not been God's decree nor fate's curse. It had been one man's spite. The sheriff, cornered, roared, "Enough! At sunrise she hangs with the board on her neck, and the stranger beside her." He raised the pistol again, desperation shaking his hand. And as the dawn's first light spilled gold across the square, the crowd surged, torn between obedience and outrage, their voices rising until the sheriff's words drowned in a tide of anger that threatened to sweep them all into violence. The square boiled over, shouts clashing in the rising light, half the crowd crying for blood, half shouting that the sheriff had lied, and the word "unclean" above Selena seemed to tremble with the storm of voices. Asa stood unyielding, his frame rooted like oak, shielding her as men shoved and cursed, their boots grinding dust into the church porch steps. The sheriff waved his pistol wildly, sweat slick on his brow, barking, "Obey me or you'll all hang beside her." But fear no longer chained every tongue. A rancher pushed forward, shouting, "You branded her because she spurned you, Whitlock. You call that law?" Others murmured agreement, faces hardening as the truth sank deeper. Selena clung to the porch post, her body racked with exhaustion, yet lit with fire in her eyes, for humiliation had birthed defiance, and now the whole town saw it burn. The sheriff, cornered, spat with rage and leveled the pistol at Asa's chest. "Then I'll strike the heart of this rebellion." The trigger trembled beneath his finger, but before he could fire, Asa lunged, seizing his wrist, twisting until the gun clattered to the boards. The crowd gasped, shock freezing them as the sheriff staggered back, clutching his arm. Asa's voice thundered, low but carrying. "Your law is a lie, Whitlock, and lies cannot stand." Murmurs surged louder, and for the first time the sheriff's deputies faltered, uncertain, their hands twitching toward their holsters, but their eyes darting nervously at the shifting crowd. Selena, breath ragged, stepped forward despite her trembling knees, placing herself beside Asa, the word "unclean" hanging over them both. "If he kills us," she cried, her voice raw but steady, "then let all of you remember, it was not justice but jealousy." Gasps rippled, heads turned, and shame pricked even the cruelest faces, for the branding had been stripped bare before all. Whitlock roared, desperate, lunging for the gun. But Asa's boot pinned it flat, and the mountain man's glare froze him mid-reach. The sheriff shrieked, "Seize them! Seize them now!" But his call rang hollow, and only a handful stirred, torn between loyalty and fear. The crowd pressed forward, a sea of restless eyes, and a farmer shouted, "You've ruled us with fear long enough. A woman echoed him, lifting her child high. "We won't bow to you anymore." The roar that followed shook the square, but danger rose with it, for rage is blind, and the mob pressed too close, fists raised, stones clutched, ready to tear Whitlock apart, or turn their fury on Asa and Selena if order collapsed. The porch creaked beneath the crush, the board above swaying, dust swirling thick in the air. Selena's vision blurred, her body so weak she could barely stand, yet she leaned against Asa's arm and whispered, "If they break us, they break themselves." His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching, and in that silence she drew strength enough to lift her chin. The sheriff, panting, cornered like a beast, screamed, "Then let the fire burn!" And his hand shot for the knife at his belt, blade flashing as he lunged not at Asa, but at Selena, determined to carve his vengeance into the only flesh he still had power over. The blade flashed in the dawn, the sheriff's roar tearing through the square as he lunged, but before steel could strike flesh, Asa moved, his arm snapping out like a striking hawk, catching Whitlock's wrist and wrenching it aside until the knife clattered to the boards. The sheriff staggered, spitting curses, but the mountain man's fist crashed into his jaw with a sound that silenced even the loudest mouths, and Whitlock crumpled to the dust like a felled tree. The crowd gasped, stunned, and for a heartbeat no one moved, the word "unclean" still swaying above Selena's head like a curse too heavy to lift. Then Asa bent, gripping the fallen board, yanking it free of its nails with a crack that echoed louder than the gunshot before it. The plank splintered, the painted words smeared with dust, and the people watched wide-eyed as he cast it into the dirt where Whitlock lay groaning. Selena swayed, her body nearly spent, her palms raw and bleeding, and Asa turned to her, his face steady, his hand outstretched. She hesitated, shame and defiance warring in her chest, until she saw his eyes. Not pity, not rescue, but recognition. Slowly she placed her trembling hand in his. And with a single motion he lifted her into his arms, as though the weight of her defiance was lighter than the shawls she had clutched through every night of shame. Gasps and murmurs rippled. He carries her. He claims her. And the crowd parted as Asa stepped down from the porch. Each stride ground the broken board deeper into the dust beneath his boots, each step a defiance against the sheriff's lie. Selena pressed her face against his chest, tears burning her eyes, not from weakness but from release, for the burden she had borne alone had at last been shared. The sun broke free of the horizon, golden light spilling across the square. And in that glow the word painted to condemn her seemed to vanish, replaced by the image of her carried high in the arms of a man who had chosen not with law or coin, but with simple, undeniable truth. The mob, their fury drained, melted back in silence, some with shame heavy on their faces, others with awe that such strength could be gentle. A woman whispered, "She stood all night," and another answered softly, "And he saw her." The preacher, pale and shaken, bowed his head, unwilling to meet her gaze, for he knew his silence had been as cruel as the sheriff's lies. Asa carried her across the square, past the fallen pistol, past the shattered board, past the faces that had spat and jeered, and he did not stop until he reached the far steps where the road opened wide toward the hills. There, with the sun burning behind him, he set her on her feet again, steadying her until her legs held. Selena lifted her head, her eyes meeting the crowd, and though her body trembled, her voice rose clear. "You called me unclean, but I stood, and he carried me when I could not." Her words struck deeper than any blow, and in that silence the weight of truth pressed upon them all. Asa placed his hand on her shoulder, steady and sure, and together they turned away from the square. Their shadows stretching long into the rising light, leaving behind a town that would never forget the day the sheriff's board broke and the branded girl walked free. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Echoes of the West. When the mountain man carried her across the broken board, would you have stood with him too?